In this episode, we're going to take something that often feels intimidating to beginners, regulatory requirements, and turn it into a practical skill, translating those requirements into engineering moves that actually change how a system behaves. For the Certified Information Privacy Technologist, CIPT, exam, you are not being asked to memorize a stack of legal citations or become a lawyer, but you are expected to recognize common regulatory themes and understand what they imply for data handling, product design, and operational processes. Many learners get stuck because they hear legal words like lawful basis, purpose limitation, or data subject rights, and they do not know how those words become buttons, workflows, logs, retention settings, and review steps. The key is to treat regulations as descriptions of outcomes and constraints, and then think like a technologist who has to create those outcomes in a system. If you can do that, you will stop seeing regulations as abstract rules and start seeing them as design inputs that lead to concrete choices. By the end, you should have a repeatable mental method for turning a requirement into a system behavior, a process control, and evidence that the behavior is real. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first move in translation is to separate regulatory language into three buckets: what must be true, what must be possible, and what must be demonstrable. What must be true is the core outcome, like collecting only what you need, using data only for stated purposes, or keeping data accurate and protected. What must be possible refers to capabilities the organization must provide, like allowing access requests, enabling deletion where appropriate, or supporting correction of inaccurate information. What must be demonstrable is about accountability, meaning you need records, logs, policies, and repeatable processes that show you did what you claim. Beginners often focus only on the first bucket and forget the other two, which leads to incomplete designs. For example, it is not enough for a system to be secure in theory if the organization cannot demonstrate controls and decisions when asked. A strong translation habit is to ask what truth you must enforce, what user or regulator action you must support, and what proof you must be able to produce. The second move is to identify the data processing story the regulation cares about. Regulations generally care about personal data, how it is collected, why it is collected, how it is used, who it is shared with, how long it is kept, and how people can influence or challenge those choices. That means your engineering translation should begin with data inventory thinking, because you cannot implement meaningful controls without knowing what data exists and where it flows. A system that cannot clearly describe its data flows tends to fail privacy requirements even if the team has good intentions, because unknown flows become uncontrolled flows. So when a regulatory theme comes up, anchor yourself by asking what personal data is involved, what processing activities occur, and what parts of the lifecycle create the main risks. This is also where beginners learn a crucial lesson. Many regulatory obligations are not feature-specific, they are data flow-specific. If you can map the flow, you can map the obligation. Now let's talk about translating transparency requirements into system behaviors, because transparency is one of the most common regulatory themes and one of the most testable in exam scenarios. A transparency requirement means people should be able to understand what data you collect, why you collect it, how you use it, who receives it, and what choices or rights they have. The engineering moves here include designing clear notice surfaces at the right moments, making sure those notice surfaces match actual system behavior, and ensuring the system can support the choices described. For example, if a notice says data is used for a particular purpose, then internal logging, downstream sharing, and analytics pipelines should align with that purpose and not quietly expand beyond it. Another engineering move is ensuring that updates to data use trigger review of notices and user-facing text, because drift between words and behavior is a major privacy failure mode. Transparency is not a document. It is an ongoing alignment between communication and reality. Consent and choice requirements are often where beginners either oversimplify or overcomplicate, so the translation method matters. The regulatory idea is that certain processing should not occur unless the person has a meaningful choice and that choice is respected. Engineering translation starts with defining what the choice controls, which means identifying the specific processing activities that must be gated. Then you need a mechanism to record the choice, apply it consistently across systems, and update it when the person changes their mind. You also need to prevent accidental bypass, such as a downstream system using data for a purpose that a user opted out of because the opt-out signal was not propagated. Another key move is building auditable state, meaning you can show when consent was given, what it covered, and how it was applied at the time. This is not about building a perfect universal consent platform. It is about ensuring that the system respects choice without hidden side paths. Purpose limitation and data minimization are two regulatory themes that translate directly into engineering decisions about what you collect and how you structure data. Purpose limitation means you define why you need data and you avoid reusing it for unrelated goals without appropriate justification. Minimization means you collect and retain only what you need, in the least invasive form that still achieves the purpose. Engineering moves here include reducing optional fields, separating data used for core functionality from data used for optional enhancement, and choosing less identifying alternatives when possible. Another move is limiting access based on need to know, because purpose limitation is weakened if any internal team can use data for any reason. In data architecture, minimization can mean using aggregation, tokenization, or selective logging so you are not storing more detail than necessary. It can also mean designing defaults that are conservative, so the system does not collect extra data unless the user actively chooses a feature that needs it. These moves reduce risk and often simplify compliance work later. Retention and deletion requirements are another area where regulation becomes very practical very quickly, because data that is kept forever becomes a permanent liability. The regulatory idea is that data should not be held longer than necessary for the stated purpose, and that it should be disposed of in a controlled way when it is no longer needed. Engineering translation includes defining retention periods by data category and purpose, implementing deletion workflows that actually remove or delink data rather than only hiding it, and making sure backups and logs are accounted for in the lifecycle. Beginners often forget that retention is not only about the primary database. It includes analytics stores, caches, debugging logs, and third-party systems. A high-yield engineering move is to design data storage with lifecycle in mind, so data categories are separable and can be expired without breaking everything. Another move is to create deletion events that propagate across systems, so a deletion request does not get stuck in one place while copies remain elsewhere. The exam can probe this by offering choices that focus only on one storage layer, and the best answer often shows awareness of the broader data footprint. Data subject rights, such as access, correction, deletion, and portability, often sound like legal concepts, but they translate into workflows and system capabilities. Access means the system and organization can retrieve a person's data in a comprehensible form, which requires indexing, identity matching, and clear output formats. Correction means there is a controlled way to update inaccurate data without breaking referential integrity or creating silent divergence across systems. Deletion means you can remove data where appropriate and demonstrate that removal across your architecture, while handling exceptions where deletion is not possible due to legal or operational reasons. Portability means exporting data in a structured, commonly used format, which requires planning for data representation and consistency. Engineering moves here include building a request intake workflow, identity verification steps to prevent disclosure to the wrong person, and an audit trail showing what was done and when. Another move is to create clear ownership using role mapping, so requests do not bounce between teams. These rights are an excellent example of the earlier translation buckets. You must make the action possible, and you must be able to demonstrate it. Security-related regulatory requirements often overlap with general security best practices, but the privacy translation focuses on protecting personal data in context and preventing harms that come from misuse or exposure. The engineering moves include access control aligned to least privilege, encryption where appropriate, secure key management, logging that supports detection without creating unnecessary data collection, and monitoring for anomalous access. Another move is ensuring that privacy controls and security controls reinforce each other rather than conflict, such as avoiding logging sensitive identifiers in plain text while still keeping enough detail to investigate incidents. Regulations often require appropriate technical and organizational measures, which means you need both technology controls and process controls like change management and incident response. The exam tends to reward answers that combine these perspectives, because privacy failures are often caused by either weak controls or weak processes, and the best solutions recognize both. For beginners, the core skill is understanding that security measures support privacy, but privacy also includes transparency, purpose, and user control, which security alone does not guarantee. Third-party sharing and cross-organization processing is another area where regulations have strong themes that translate into engineering and governance moves. When personal data is shared with a vendor, the organization needs to ensure the vendor uses the data only for the agreed purpose, protects it appropriately, and supports lifecycle controls like deletion. Engineering translation may include limiting what data is shared, using scoped identifiers, and implementing interface controls that prevent vendors from pulling more data than needed. Governance translation includes contract terms, due diligence, and ongoing monitoring. But from a technologist viewpoint, you also need technical guardrails that enforce those terms. Another move is maintaining an inventory of third-party data flows and updating it when systems change, because unknown sharing is a serious risk. If you can map where data goes, you can implement controls and update notices accurately. On the exam, questions often test whether you treat third-party processing as an afterthought or as an integrated part of your data lifecycle thinking. A repeated pitfall for beginners is to treat regulatory requirements as a checklist that can be satisfied by writing a policy rather than by changing system behavior. Policies matter, but they do not automatically constrain how data flows, how defaults work, or how choices are applied. Another pitfall is to treat engineering moves as purely technical and ignore how they connect to user expectations and organizational accountability. For example, building an access request workflow is not just an export feature. It must also include identity verification, tracking, and consistent handling to prevent disclosures and delays. A third pitfall is to assume that one control solves a category of obligations, like assuming de-identification removes all risk or assuming encryption alone ensures compliance. Regulations care about appropriate measures and context is exactly what exam scenarios provide. Your best defense is to keep translating requirements into outcomes, capabilities, and proof, and then ensure your engineering moves align with those. To make this translation skill repeatable, you can rely on a simple mental sequence that works across many requirements. Start by restating the requirement as an outcome in plain language, like people should understand what happens, or people should be able to delete data, or data should not be used beyond its purpose. Next, identify the processing steps where the requirement matters, which might include collection, storage, sharing, analytics, or deletion. Then choose the engineering move that changes system behavior at the right point in the flow, such as gating processing, limiting collection, enforcing retention, or propagating a deletion event. After that, identify the supporting process control, like review, approval, incident response integration, or vendor oversight, because engineering moves need organizational support to stay effective over time. Finally, identify what evidence would demonstrate the control, like logs, records, system states, or audit artifacts. This approach keeps you from drifting into either pure law talk or pure technology talk, and it lands you in the practical space the CIPT exam is designed to assess. When you can translate regulatory requirements into practical engineering moves, you gain a skill that makes both studying and real-world reasoning easier, because you stop treating regulations as external pressure and start treating them as design constraints like performance or reliability. The exam will often present a scenario with a privacy risk and then ask for the best action, and the best action is usually the one that turns a requirement into a concrete change in data handling, user experience, or operational capability. If you anchor yourself on outcomes, capabilities, and demonstrable proof, you will select answers that are complete rather than partial and that reflect mature privacy engineering thinking. You do not need to know every regulation in depth to do this well. You need to recognize the themes and know what they imply for systems. That is what makes this high yield, because the same translation method applies across many regulatory contexts and many technology scenarios. With that method in your pocket, regulatory language becomes less intimidating and more like a set of practical instructions for building and operating systems that respect people.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.